Hello, and welcome to Elevating Voices in Memoir and Fiction. I'm Joelle Tamraz, and my guest today is Karen DeBonis. Karen writes about motherhood, people pleasing, and personal growth, inspired by the experience of raising her son Matthew. Her work has appeared in major news outlets such as the New York Times and Today.com, as well as Newsweek.com, and various literary journals. Her debut memoir, Growth, we published in May of this year. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Joel. I appreciate this opportunity.
So, when did you start writing your memoir, and what was the hardest part to write?
Well, I started decades ago, literally around 1999, which was 2 years after my son was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. And I just felt that it was a story I needed to tell. And I took some local memoir writing classes and wrote for a few years. And then a couple things happened. I actually left my job because my son was not recovering as predicted and he really needed more support. So I became his full-time mentor and cheerleader at home. And then we moved across town and the computer with all my files got stashed in the attic. And I couldn't bring myself to get back to it. So it really wasn't until 2016 I had my own health issues. I had to leave work on medical leave. And I just felt very clearly that the universe was giving me this gift, time to finish my memoir. I just knew instantly that's what I needed to do. So from that point on, I've just been pretty much full-time as much as possible, writing this memoir.
Yeah.
And in terms of the hardest part, I would say it wasn't so much writing the facts. I did hold on to all my old work calendars, so I had documentation of what happened when, because everything went in my work calendar, and I kept medical receipts and that type of thing. And so it wasn't so much that, but it was really digging into my truth. So I would write something and it felt like that was true to me, and then I would go back to it, whether the next day or a year later, and I would look at it and think, nope, that's not it. I just had to dig deeper, and every time I dug deeper, it was painful, ultimately rewarding and helpful to the story, but it was really just wrestling with a lot of who I am and how I got to be the way I am. And so that was, I would say, the hardest part.
Yeah, I can imagine. And in light of that, you come across as a very brave and persistent advocate for your son in the memoir. But I know you haven't always felt that way. Tell us.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for that. And it's interesting in this whole process. So I had beta readers for a while. And if your viewers don't know, they're early readers of a manuscript to give feedback to the author. And then later in the process, more recently, I had advanced readers. So they would, again, have a copy of the manuscript in an almost finished form and, to write reviews and provide some feedback. And that's been a pretty consistent type of comment that I would get, comments about my being strong or brave or persistent. And I recognized that I was persistent, but the brave part, I didn't see it. I saw myself as being a people pleaser and not speaking up loudly enough on behalf of my son when I should have. And I, had obviously a lot of shame around that. And I couldn't see past that. And it was literally only in the past year when I knew I had this book deal and my memoir was going to become a real thing, that I've started to see that I was brave. And that was actually hard for me to reconcile, to accept that. And I was persistent and I was, even, dare I say it, strong in my own way. So that was really an evolution for me to get to that point.
That's wonderful. It's like the writing ultimately gave you that gift.
It did. It absolutely did.
And your memoir contains a lot of personal revelation. Did you have any concerns about sharing some aspects of the story?
Yes, so I did have a lot of concerns about sharing, the kind of worst parts of myself as a mother, is how I thought of it. But I knew early on that people would see themselves in my story. As a people pleaser, I recognize people pleasing behavior in others. Not that I would assume that that's what they're experiencing, and they may not identify it that way, but I see myself in other people's actions and other people's stories, and I really felt that other people would see themselves in my story. So I really wanted to, I felt that it was almost like a service, that this was something that I could do for others, just to kind of share my story. Um, and then what I've noticed, especially since 2016, every time I've published an essay, as you mentioned, I've been very fortunate, to have some great bylines, whether I'm publishing an essay or I've had a blog that I haven't paid too much attention to lately, but I started a blog in 2016, and I share on social media. And every time I share something that feels kind of scary and vulnerable to me, I have people reach out to me, often privately in an email or a message, just to say, hey, yeah, I've experienced this too, and here's my story. And people even share things that I get the sense that they haven't shared with other people. So I really believe, and Brene Brown and other writers, much more famous writers talk about this a lot, but vulnerability is what connects us. And
Mm.
I just feel that it creates this experience of shared humanity. So I believe it takes a lot of courage to share the things that, are weaknesses. And when I have the courage to do that, it gives other people the courage to recognize their own weaknesses, perhaps, and then they can decide if that's something that they want to work on or react differently to. So it just creates this opportunity, I think, for many people to grow.
Yes, we definitely feel empathy throughout the memoir, and the end
Thank you.
is particularly life affirming. So
Thank you. That's wonderful to
that
hear.
goal.
I appreciate that.
And I realize it's a family story. Yes, it's your story as Matthew's mother, but there's a whole family in your book. How did your husband react to your writing?
Yeah, well, he knew that I was writing from the very beginning and was very supportive. And I think I showed him little bits here and there. My son Matt, he was 11, I call him Matt. In the story, he's Matthew as a child. And then in real life, around I think fifth grade or so, he wanted us to start calling him Matt. So actually in the book, he does transition to Matt. So he, from the very beginning, was very supportive of my writing it. And, but there were many parts that we had never talked about. In part, I am a very private person, and I didn't even realize how private I was until this whole, recently on my writing journey, I realized how much I really keep inside. So that's kind of my nature. And my husband's nature is not to talk about deep things a whole lot. So we both, just our natures kind of had this block in our communication about this whole story.
Mm.
So there were many things, dramatic scenes in the story that my husband Michael, and I call him Mike in the book, but he never knew about. So I realized I was going to have to let him know if I really intended to put this book in the world. So we've had many times early, around 2016, 17, 18, when I would say, hey, Michael, let's sit on the couch. I want you to read something.
Mm.
And, sadly, when couples go through, having a sick child or some type of medical crisis, often it breaks up that relationship or that marriage. And we stuck it out, all these years. We've actually been married 40 years now. We stuck it out all those years. And then recently, when I started sharing more of the story for him, we got even closer, because that was our time finally to talk about what had happened and what were our dynamics that contributed to this. And, we both, it was a chance to look at our weaknesses and look at our strengths and really just explore that. And it's brought us much, much closer.
That's
And for
wonderful.
and for my sons also. So they're both adults now. My younger son, Steve, was 6 when his brother, Matt, was diagnosed with the brain tumor. And, I don't know if we ever really talked about what the experience was for him. So there came a point a few years ago, my manuscript was finished enough that I was ready to share it. I wanted them to know both what I was saying about our family, and also, again, some of those very dramatic scenes they didn't know about. And I wanted them to hear it from me. So I told them kind of what to expect, and we processed that. And then I gave them the manuscript, and it just gave us many opportunities to talk about what happened. I had great relief to know that Steve didn't remember much about what went on, and he didn't seem to be, you wonder as a mom,
Mhm.
is your healthy child suffering because of the attention you have to give to the sick child? And he seems not to have suffered from any of that. He felt he got enough attention and support. And so we've all had many, many conversations about this, and it's just brought our whole family closer. So that's been another really wonderful silver lining of, just putting myself out there.
For that itself, it is worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you've addressed this point, but I will still ask, did you find the writing therapeutic? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there was a writer who once wrote about the difference between therapy and therapeutic. And I wish I could remember who the writer was. It might have just been a, social media post. But so therapy is a structured process of one type or another, usually with a professional guiding it. Although many individuals will embark on writing as therapy with a goal to, process previous trauma or that type of thing. And so my writing, I don't think of as being therapy, but it was therapeutic because it healed me and it felt good. Even though it hurt in the process, the outcome of it really felt good. So I do feel that my writing was therapeutic. And as I said, with my whole family, my writing has been therapeutic for all of us. So again, another, silver lining.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a concept that you bring up in the book, which I love, about post-traumatic growth. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I had never heard of post-traumatic growth. It was actually coined in the 1990s by some researchers in North Carolina. And it was my son, Matt, as an adult, who brought it to my attention. And I won't tell a lot about that scene. I'll let your viewers read the book for that. But so we're familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD,
Yeah.
as a result of trauma, either childhood trauma or adult trauma. People often develop PTSD where they have recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks, and sometimes changes in physical health, mental and emotional health, even personality changes from just, their whole body trying to process that trauma. And what these researchers found was that often after a trauma, people are able to grow in different ways. It could be in life outlook or career, or changes, that personal growth that I'm such a fan of, always striving for. And both Matt and I feel that we have experienced post-traumatic growth, that we have grown from this experience. And so the title of the book being Growth, it's really mostly how I grew in so many ways from this whole experience. But for both Matt and I, we feel that there have been good outcomes from this.
I think the dual story, again, it is primarily your story, but it's also very much Matt's story.
Hmm.
Creates those two layers that are so
Right.
intriguing in your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
When did you think about publishing? And can you tell us a bit about your publishing path?
So, like I said, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to share my story. Some writers, especially of memoir, just write for themselves to process what happened or to document it. But I knew that I wanted to share, and I didn't know anything about the process. So when I returned to writing in 2016, I just read and listened to podcasts and signed up for newsletters, everything I could possibly do to learn about the publishing process. So I got my memoir a couple years ago. I got it to the point where I thought it was ready to be published. I did hire an editor at a couple points along the way, and that was very helpful to make sure I was ready. So then I began querying agents, and this whole querying thing, I had never even heard that word before. It's just a big involved process, and there are ways to do it right and ways to do it wrong, and it takes a lot of research. And I finally came up with a list of agents that I thought would be a good fit for my book. And I realized, and I had read a lot about the rejection, and not hearing from agents because they're so swamped, they just can't reply to every query. So I decided that I wanted to be prepared for that rejection. So what I did early on was, I'll show you this here. When I did get an email back from an agent, what I did was I bought some colorful paper and I printed it out. You can see the print there. I printed it out and I called this my rejection rose. Now this one's pretty old, so it's falling apart, but
That's incredible.
and it was fun, and I shared a couple of videos of this on social media. And I got one and then I got a couple and I did a little vase and then I got more and I didn't know what to do with them. Well, I had so many that I ended up making this chain. So this is my chain of rejection roses. I'm not
Karen,
even
that's
sure
got to
how.
be the most creative response to
Thank
rejection that
you.
I've ever seen.
Thank you. I was glad that I thought of it. I felt like I was prepared. So my goal was to query 100 agents. And seriously, I mean, people will query way more than that. But I thought I'm going to query 100 agents and then kind of decide what my plan B is. And I got to about 85 agents and I did them in batches. So maybe 5 or 6 at a time. And if I didn't get a good response, I would do some more revisions and work on my query letter. And let's see, in January 2022, last year, I got to about 85 agents. And I thought, well, I think I'm ready to maybe query some small presses. And a lot of small presses do not need an agent. So there's that middleman that's kind of removed. And I queried 5 small presses and I got a offer of publication from one. And I checked them out with some other writers. They had had good experiences. And I said yes. And then I completely had a emotional meltdown of joy. So yeah, it was a long, involved process, a lot of work, but
And here we are a year later.
here we are. Yeah, believe it or not.
So that is a positive as well, that a year
Yeah.
turnaround
Yeah,
is quick
yeah.
compared to what you hear some traditional publishing timelines.
Well, that too. And I'll be very honest and say that I'm 64. So, and I'm relatively healthy, but I didn't want to wait 5 years to go through the process of, having an agent then present the book to publishers and try to get a publisher and that whole process. I knew that this was going to be quicker and I'm thrilled to be at this point.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And what advice do you have for other memoirists seeking to publish?
Good question. One of them would be to polish your manuscript as much as possible. Again, I had beta readers, as I mentioned, to give me some feedback. I paid some, editors here and there along the process. I was fortunate to find a critique group, and I highly recommend finding a critique group. It's not always easy to connect with them. I just happened to see a writer on Facebook who posted that she was looking for a critique group and landed in with this group of memoirists. And I feel like they are the single most influential factor in improving my writing to the point that I was able to get a book deal. My critique buddies know we're very tight. They understand my story, and that's just been really great. So I would say try to get into a critique group as much as possible.
How long were you with that group? Or are you still writing with them? Or
Oh,
how long was that phase, if you will?
yeah, still writing with them. And I have to say, so we've had a few members in and out, but right now we're a core of 5 people. And 3 of the 5 of us have book deals.
Amazing.
1 we know is right on the cusp, and 1 is a little bit behind, but we know that she's going to get there. So it's probably been maybe 3 years now. And they know me like some people close in my family don't know me, because we just, that's what memoirists do. We just share these deep parts of ourselves. So critique group was really, really helpful. For other writers and memoirists, connect with writers. Again, social media. I happen to be on Twitter and Facebook. Those are 2 that work for me, but you can find them different places. If you're not into social media, look in your community for writers groups, for writers events, that type of thing. Just connect and be a good literary citizen. That's a concept that's really important. So, you don't want to just be completely about, hey, I'm writing this book and I want you to read it when it's done. It's really about lifting up other writers, supporting them, applauding them. I really made the habit early on in 2016. If I read an essay that really resonated with me or a book, I would track down that writer. I'd find their webpage, I would find their email, even if it was through their agent, and just say, hey, I really love what you wrote, and thank you for sharing this, and those type of things just go a long way. Connect with readers. Again, it can be social media. It doesn't have to be. If you do social media, you don't have to do them all. Like I said, I do Twitter and Facebook. I'm on Instagram, but I don't really do much with it. I haven't done TikTok yet. I don't know if I will. You got to figure out what works for you. And I mentioned that tracking writers down and finding them through their website. I think one of the most critical steps is to get a website for yourself. It can just be 1 page, a landing page. But if you write and you want people to resonate with your writing, those people are going to want to find you, and you want to be found. And a website is the best way to be found. So I'm not an expert. I won't give recommendations, but I'll just say that there are sites where you can do one by yourself. And I did one myself in 2016, and nobody could be less computer savvy than me. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. But there are also places that you can hire someone to just do a very simple website for yourself. It's definitely a good investment. Again, read about the process of writing and querying agents and publishing. I will say sometimes it was like getting a second master's degree, maybe even a PhD, for all the self-learning that I did during that time. And then definitely for memoirists, especially, consider small presses, because there's a saying in the industry, memoir is a hard sell, and it's true for various reasons. But small presses are often open to books and manuscripts that the big publishers may not be interested in. So be open to small presses.
That's all great advice, Karen. Thank you.
You.
And I've been impressed with how you've assembled your book launch team and the communication that you've done well ahead of publication. What would you recommend in terms of marketing Memoir?
Again, I'm completely self-taught, and I do not have a publicist. If you can afford one, I say go for it. That was just not in my budget. I have an awesome launch team, 70 members from 4 countries and something like maybe 20 states in the US. For full transparency, Joelle is on my launch team. I'm not even sure how we found each other. It might have been Twitter at some point.
Twitter.
Twitter.
I've been following your memoir journey on Twitter for at least a couple of years, I would say.
Wow, wow. And so that's one of my first recommendations in terms of marketing. Don't wait until you have a book deal to start marketing, but all that connecting that you want to be doing with writers, you want to bring people along on your journey. And with me, I just found that I do have a blog and a newsletter, so I have subscribers, and there are people that I just connected with them, a lot of other writers back in 2016, and I've never met them in real life, but they've been supportive of me and I've been supportive of them. So let me just say what a launch team is. So a launch team is a group of people who help promote your book. And there's lots of different ways for that to happen. And so there were people that had supported me for so long, and I felt pretty confident that if I asked them to be on my launch team, they would be happy to do that. And they were. Then I had other writers who had just kind of followed my journey, who reached out to me and said, hey, if you need any help with your book, I'm happy to help. And I was like, okay, great. And then some friends and family, I happened to be at a wedding. I was talking to one of my husband's cousins, and she had a child with some neurodiversity. And that's a theme in my memoir, dealing with a child with neurodiversity. And she knew about my book. She's a very social person. And I just said, I have this launch team. Is this something that you might want to do? And she jumped on the chance. And then we were talking later, and she happened to mention it. And some other cousins were like, well, what about me? I want to be on your launch team. So it just kind of grew from there. And a carrot that I dangled to some writers, I don't remember, Joelle, if I dangled this to you or not, but I said, if you're on my launch team, feel free to use any of my correspondence or any of the things that I do. Feel free to use them for yourself when your time comes to assemble a launch team. So I said, I give you permission to plagiarize whatever you want. So that was kind of an enticement.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did, and it's funny, I never thought marketing would be fun, but it's actually kind of fun. So, it's all about getting the word out. So one of the things I did early on was I created a business card, and there's a bunch of different places you can create business cards. They're not real expensive. And I just has my my book title on it. And at first I didn't have a pre-order link or an order link. So it was just the idea of getting my book out there. And well, I'll tell you a story and then I have a little show and tell for you. So I told my launch team, I said, hey, I have these business cards. So how about we do some type of a contest? Tell me if you want to participate. I'll mail you some cards. And if you take a picture of either a person you give the card to or a place that you leave the card, like I like to leave mine in a CVS basket after I'm shopping, or put them on the grocery store shelf, or tack them up on a community bulletin board. I said, if you take a picture and send it in, we'll do a contest. And so I was giving away a $25 gift certificate to my local indie bookstore. Well, people went nuts. One person, because my title is growth, so she put the card in the plants at her doctor's office, which was great.
That's very clever.
Another one was very strategic. There's a medical facility near us. And so she went to the businesses around there and put them on their bulletin boards and handed them to the owner, because her reasoning was, if a parent has a sick child in the hospital, they might run out to Starbucks for a coffee or go to Panera's for a sandwich, and they'll see the card and they'll relate to it.
Yeah.
So it was just a blast. And then on my website, I created a gallery for people to see the pictures of what people did. And then some people who didn't quite get the concept at first, then were like, oh, now I get what you mean. So I'm going to do another contest. And so I have a new card that I made up, and I'll show you. And so I had this sense, because it's been so long since I started this memoir, I had the sense that it finally came real. I had this vision or this dream, and it came real. So I kept thinking of the Velveteen Rabbit. So I bought myself a little Velveteen Rabbit, and I named her Velvetina.
Oh,
And I posted her picture a few times on social media. And this is another way of It's showing that I'm human. I'm not just writing this book, but I have this little Velveteen Rabbit, and she holds my card.
Oh,
And
it's
so I'll show you.
perfect.
So this is my book cover there. And then on the back, I have a QR code. Now that people can pre-order it, they can just click on the QR code and
Oh,
order it. And again, it's really easy on these websites. They just can make a QR code automatically for you. These cards are great. And there's this concept called word of mouth marketing. And there's some research to show that that is one of the best ways to increase sales, is to get people talking about it. So the whole idea is you want people to talk about it. And I'm very much an introvert. So for me, I have a hard time telling people, oh, I have a book coming out. But if I can hand them a card, it kind of does the talking for me. So that's been great.
And
And
I'm going to give something away that you paint very well. So I think you're a visual person
oh, maybe. Thank
also. And
you.
I think that's wonderful. You can show that image.
Yeah, thank you so much. And there's another market that you don't want to forget about, which is the library market. I think there's something like 120,000 libraries in the US. So just imagine if even half of them bought your book, even 10%, that's a big chunk. So I came up with this. This is called a sell sheet. And you can Google, there are specific things that you want to include in a sell sheet, and there's lots of different ways to design it. But this is important to have because libraries and also even bookstores will make their purchasing decisions based on what they have in the sell sheet. Now, I haven't distributed this yet because I'm waiting for just a couple more reviews that I'm going to add to it. But again, as an introvert, it's easier for me to hand this. I can go into a library or I can mail this to a library and say, here's a book. Would you consider buying this? If I'm doing it in person, it's easier for me to have something to give.
One of the questions that viewers may ask is around building your newsletter list. Any tips for that?
Well, it's important to have a newsletter list because if you get somebody's email, nobody other than the owner of the email can take that away from you. So, for example, think about what happened with Twitter recently. There were fears that Twitter was going to shut down completely. So if all your followers and all your connections to your potential readers were on Twitter and that shut down, you were really stuck then. So it's important to ask for people's emails. You can never add an email to your list without permission, but it's important to ask for emails and to build that list because then you can control your communication with them. I've had offers that I put on my website, like I've had tip sheets, 50 ways to fight your people pleasing, and different offers. Right now, my magnet that I have is a free first chapter of my memoir. So if you sign up on my mailing list, by the way, it's www.karendebonis.com, you'll get the free first chapter of my memoir. So it's helpful to periodically ask people if they'd like to sign up. What I do now is I ask people, may I sign you up on my mailing list? And if they say yes, may I have your email address? So then I do the work for them and it's much more successful.
Makes sense.
It's a very slow process. Lots of people are much more successful than me. I have maybe about 450 people right now. It's taken me since 2016 to grow that. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to kind of where many famous writers are, but it's more than some other people. So
yeah,
it's a process.
It's all counting. People read the book and the reviews come in. I'm very confident it will be highly.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Well, I hope so. I hope so.
So, Karen, what's next for you?
I think of it as the long tail of marketing. So my book comes out May 2nd. The marketing is going to continue for even a year after that. In fact, some authors continue to market for a number of years after that. I hope to line up more podcasts and continue to write essays and get them published and work with libraries and do schedule book signings and that type of thing. So at some point, I just want to kick my feet up and relax a little bit and recover. And then I'm not sure. Most people who write one book write a second book. I don't know if that's in store for me. I never was a writer before this. I think now I have become a writer, so I do feel some, I don't want to say urgency, but I do sometimes feel like there are things that I really want to write about.
Mm.
So that may continue, but I don't know yet if there's another book. I'll have to wait and see.
Makes sense. It sounds like there's, as you say, a long haul of marketing.
Yes.
You're engaging in it with enthusiasm, and
Right,
I
right.
wish you
Thank
all the
you.
very best. This book deserves to be read and read very widely. And thank you for speaking with us and sharing your insights.
It was a lot of fun.